Benjamin Benji Rathman had spent most of his life navigating rivers and seas, first in the Rockies of Colorado as a kid, then as a commercial fisherman off the Pacific coast. Retirement led him to the wilds of Alaska, where the rhythm of nature dictated his days. Fishing was more than a pastime. It was a passion that refused to fade, drawing him to a remote river bend far from town. At dawn, Benji rowed his small boat to his favorite spot, the chill of the Alaskan morning invigorating him. The river, clear and alive with fish, was his sanctuary. He anchored in the shallows, his seasoned hands moving with precision as he prepared his rod. Casting his line, he settled on the bank, let the earth cool beneath him, and let the peace of the wilderness wash over him. Hours passed in tranquil solitude until a powerful tug jolted him from his reverie. Instincts honed over decades took over as he began reeling in his catch. The fish on the other end fought fiercely, sending ripples through the water. Benji's heart raced, and his muscles tensed as he engaged in the familiar struggle. After a fierce battle, the fish broke the surface. A massive Chinook salmon, over 50 pounds, its scales shimmering in the light. Benji, filled with pride, knew he had landed something extraordinary. But as he admired his catch, a low growl from the forest behind him shattered the tranquility. Benji turned slowly, senses alert, as the primal sound echoed through the wilderness. Emerging from the dense underbrush was a grizzly bear, its massive form moving with a predatory grace. The bear's eyes were fixed on the salmon, its nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of the fresh catch. Benji's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight of the creature. Its hulking frame, the dark fur rippling over powerful muscles, and the claws that dug into the earth with each step. The bear was close. Too close. Benji's mind raced as he calculated the distance between them, knowing that the few feet separating him from the beast could be covered in an instant. He was caught off guard, the thrill of the catch now replaced by a stark, primal fear. The bear's gaze was unyielding, its hunger evident as it inched closer, drawn by the promise of an easy meal. Benji's thoughts were a blur as he assessed his options. He was unarmed, save for his fishing rod and the small knife he carried for gutting fish. Neither would be of any use against a grizzly. Running was out of the question. He knew that bears could outrun a man with terrifying speed. Climbing a tree was equally futile, as the bear could easily follow. He was trapped, with only the river at his back and the bear in front of him. The bear let out another growl, its body lowering into a predatory stance as it edged closer. Benji's pulse pounded in his ears as he realized the gravity of the situation. The salmon, once a prized catch, now felt like a burden in his hands. He could see the hunger in the bear's eyes, the desperation that drove it toward him. The wilderness was unforgiving, and the bear was a part of that unyielding force. At that moment, Benji's survival instincts took over. He knew that making any sudden moves could provoke an attack, but doing nothing was not an option either. The bear was growing bolder, its steps more deliberate as it closed the distance. Benji tightened his grip on the salmon, his mind racing for a solution. Then a thought occurred to him, one born out of years of experience and a deep respect for the wild. The bear wasn't interested in him, it was after the fish. The salmon was the true prize, the sustenance that the bear needed to survive. A realization tempered Benji's fear. He was not the enemy here, merely a man who had stumbled into the bear's world. Slowly, deliberately, Benji made his decision. With a deep breath, he lifted the salmon, holding it out in front of him. The bear's eyes locked onto the fish, its movements pausing as it recognized the offering. Benji could feel the tension in the air, a taut string ready to snap. He had only one chance to do this right. With a swift motion, Benji threw the salmon toward the bear. The fish arced through the air, landing with a splash on the wet rocks just a few feet away from the bear. The grizzly hesitated for a split second, its instincts torn between the threat of the human and the lure of the easy meal. Then, with a low grunt, the bear lunged forward, seizing the salmon in its powerful jaws. Benji watched, holding his breath, as the bear tore into the salmon, its sharp teeth ripping through the flesh. For a brief moment, the bear's attention was entirely on its meal, allowing Benji a chance to retreat. He backed away slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, keeping his eyes locked on the bear. The bear, engrossed in its feast, barely noticed his retreat. Although relieved, Benji knew he wasn't safe yet. Each step took him farther from danger, while the bear remained by the riverbank, devouring the salmon with fierce intensity. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm, relying on his instincts to guide him to safety. After what felt like an eternity, Benji reached the edge of the clearing and slipped behind a thicket of trees, finally breaking the bear's line of sight. He exhaled deeply, the tension releasing from his body as he leaned against a tree, his hands trembling with adrenaline. He stayed hidden for a few minutes, listening to the bear finish its meal. The sounds of crunching bones and rustling underbrush filled the air, but Benji knew the worst was over. Once the bear moved on, he allowed himself to relax, grateful to have survived the encounter unscathed. Every morning, Ethan Reynolds laced up his running shoes with ritualistic precision, mentally preparing for the challenge ahead. Living in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, he relished the rugged trails for their unforgiving terrain and breathtaking beauty. Today's run would push him further than ever before, deep into the wilderness where few dared to venture. Ethan set off at a steady pace, his breath visible in the cold morning air. The trail, familiar yet unpredictable, snaked through dense forest, up and down the mountain slopes, a narrow path bordered by towering pines and jagged rocks. Each step was ingrained in his muscle memory. He knew the trail's every twist and turn. His confidence allowed him to focus on the rhythm of his breath and the steady beat of his heart. As he ascended a steep incline, the forest opened up, revealing a stunning view of the valley below. But the peace was short-lived. Cresting the hill and beginning his descent, Ethan spotted a massive grizzly bear foraging about 50 yards ahead. The bear, sensing his presence, lifted its head and locked eyes with him. At that moment, time seemed to freeze. Ethan was alone, deep in the wilderness, with no help in sight. The bear, startled by his sudden appearance, let out a low growl and started toward him. Instinctively, Ethan knew running would trigger the bear's predatory instincts, but standing still felt equally perilous. With no bear spray, no weapon, only his speed and wits, he had to act fast. The bear's approach was slow at first, then gained momentum, its massive body hurtling toward him with terrifying speed. Adrenaline surged through Ethan as he turned and sprinted down the trail, his legs moving faster than ever before. The once friendly terrain now turned treacherous, littered with roots and rocks that threatened to trip him with every step. Behind him, the bear's heavy footfall echoed like thunder, growing louder by the second. Ethan's lungs burned, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pushed himself to the limit. He couldn't maintain this pace forever, but stopping wasn't an option. He needed to outsmart the bear and use the terrain to his advantage. As he rounded a bend, the trail split into two paths. Without hesitating, Ethan veered onto the less traveled route, a steep, rocky descent deeper into the forest. The path was perilous, barely wide enough for one person, with a sheer drop on one side and a wall of rock on the other. He hoped the narrow trail would slow the bear, but it was undeterred, crashing through the underbrush with frightening speed. The ground shook beneath its weight, the vibrations reaching Ethan's feet. His legs screamed in protest, but he forced them to keep moving, navigating the treacherous path with a mix of skill and desperation. The descent was brutal, each step a test of balance and agility. Ethan leaped over fallen trees, ducked under low-hanging branches, and zigzagged around boulders, all while the bear closed the gap. The trail grew narrower and more dangerous, but Ethan's mind remained sharp, analyzing every possible route and every potential obstacle. In the back of his mind, a voice urged him to keep going, to push past the pain and exhaustion. He knew that if he slowed down, even for a moment, the bear would be upon him. His muscles ached, and his lungs felt like they were on fire, but he refused to give in. Survival was all that mattered. The trail took another sharp turn, this time leading to a small clearing at the edge of a cliff. Ethan skidded to a halt, his feet digging into the loose dirt as he came to the precipice. Below him, the ground dropped away sharply, the cliff face plunging into a rocky ravine. There was no way down, at least not a safe one. He glanced back over his shoulder, the bear now just a few yards behind him. It slowed as it approached the clearing, its dark eyes fixed on Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and aggression. The bear was close enough now that Ethan could see the coarse fur bristling on its massive shoulders and the sharp claws that dug into the earth with each step. With nowhere to go but down, Ethan made a split-second decision. He turned and sprinted along the edge of the cliff, hoping to find a way around or a spot narrow enough to cross. The ground beneath his feet was loose and unstable, threatening to give way with each step. The bear followed, its massive bulk moving with surprising agility along the narrow path. Ethan's body was at its breaking point, every muscle screaming as he pushed himself to outrun the bear. The unforgiving terrain and the looming cliff edge left no room for error. One misstep could send him plummeting to his death. As he rounded a bend, Ethan spotted a narrow ledge jutting from the cliff face. It was a risky move, but it might be his only chance. Without hesitating, he leaped onto the ledge, his feet slipping on loose gravel as he fought for balance. The bear, too large to follow directly, hesitated before attempting to maneuver onto the ledge. Ethan's gamble paid off. The bear struggled on the narrow ledge, its massive paws slipping on the loose rocks. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan scrambled higher up the cliff, where the terrain grew more challenging for the bear. But the bear was relentless, clawing its way up the cliff with a determination that matched Ethan's desperation. Ethan spotted a large boulder perched precariously on the plateau ahead. If he could dislodge it, the boulder might block the bear's path. With the last of his strength, Ethan pushed against the boulder. At first, it barely moved, but he poured every ounce of energy into the effort. Finally, the boulder broke free, tumbling down the cliff with a deafening crash. Startled, the bear lost its footing, sliding down the slope in a furious roar and disappearing into the trees below. Breathless and trembling, Ethan stood at the plateau's edge, the realization sinking in he had survived. Amelia Henderson had always been fascinated by the wild. Her love for wildlife led her to pursue a degree in wildlife biology, a field where she could blend her passion for animals with her academic rigor. When she received her first field research assignment in Yellowstone National Park, she was both thrilled and nervous. It was a dream come true, yet the weight of responsibility hung heavy on her shoulders. Yellowstone, with its vast landscapes and rich biodiversity, was not a place to be taken lightly. The assignment was simple in theory: observe and document grizzly bear behavior. Grizzlies, one of the park's most iconic and feared residents, were a critical species to understand, especially as human-bear interactions were becoming more common. The data Amelia was tasked to collect would contribute to ongoing research aimed at minimizing these encounters, ensuring the safety of both humans and bears. She knew the importance of her work and was determined to make a positive impression on her superiors. After a week of preparation, Amelia set out on a crisp September morning. The air was cool, and the first hints of autumn were beginning to paint the leaves in hues of gold and red. She had spent days familiarizing herself with the park's layout, studying maps and consulting with veteran biologists who had years of experience working in Yellowstone. They had all emphasized the importance of maintaining a safe distance from the bears, respecting their space, and being aware of the environment at all times. Armed with this knowledge, Amelia felt ready. The location she had chosen for her observation was a remote area known for its bear activity. It was a spot not often frequented by tourists, which made it ideal for her research. Amelia knew the risks involved, but was confident in her abilities. As she hiked through the forest, her senses were heightened, every rustle of leaves or snap of a branch putting her on alert. She moved carefully, her footsteps deliberately quiet as she approached a known grizzly habitat. After several hours of trekking, Amelia finally spotted them, a mother grizzly and her two cubs foraging near a stream. The sight was breathtaking. The mother, a massive creature with a thick coat of brown fur, was intently focused on digging up roots while her cubs playfully tumbled nearby. Amelia's heart raced with excitement. This was exactly what she had hoped to find. Positioning herself at a safe distance, Amelia settled in to observe. She kept low, using the natural cover of the terrain to remain unnoticeable. Her notepad and binoculars were ready, and she began documenting the bear's behavior. Time seemed to stand still as she immersed herself in the observation. She marveled at the bond between the mother and her cubs, and the way she would pause her foraging to nudge them closer whenever they ventured too far. Amelia understood the significance of these moments, and the importance of capturing them accurately. The data she was gathering would contribute to the greater understanding of grizzly bear behavior, information that could one day save lives, both human and bear. But as the hours passed, the light began to change, signaling the approach of evening. Amelia knew it would soon be time to head back to camp, so she wanted to capture a final set of observations before calling it a day. It happened during this last stretch of observation. Focused on the mother bear, Amelia didn't notice the fallen branch beneath her foot until it was too late. The snap of the twig echoed through the silent forest, sharp and jarring. In an instant, the mother bear's head shot up, her dark eyes locking onto Amelia's position. The air seemed to grow heavier, the tension palpable. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she realized her mistake. She had startled the bear, a mother with cubs, the most dangerous scenario she could have encountered. The grizzly, now fully aware of her presence, stood on her hind legs, towering over the landscape. Her massive form cast a shadow across the ground, a clear and intimidating display of power. Amelia's mind raced as she recalled her training. Panic threatened to take hold, but she forced herself to remain calm. The first rule of bear encounters was never to run. Running would trigger the bear's predatory instinct, and there was no way a human could outrun a grizzly. Instead, she needed to appear non-threatening and slowly back away, giving the bear space to feel secure again. Slowly, deliberately, Amelia began to retreat. She kept her movements measured, her eyes never leaving the bear. The mother grizzly dropped back onto all fours, her ears pinned back, a low growl rumbling from deep within her chest. Amelia could see the tension in the bear's muscles and the readiness to charge if she perceived any threat to her cubs. Amelia's hand instinctively reached for her notepad. It was a small, unassuming object, but at this moment it became her lifeline. She knew that making herself appear larger might deter the bear, at least long enough for her to retreat to safety. With a slow, fluid motion, she raised the notepad above her head, extending her arms to their full length. It was a small gesture, but in the bear's eyes it made Amelia appear larger, less like prey. The grizzly hesitated, her growls growing louder, more menacing. Amelia could feel the weight of the bear's gaze on her, the intensity of the moment nearly overwhelming. But she held her ground, continuing her slow backward steps, maintaining eye contact without being confrontational. She needed to convey that she was not a threat and that she respected the bear's space. Every second felt like an eternity as the grizzly watched her, gauging her intentions. The cubs, sensing their mother's agitation, had stopped playing and huddled close to her. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the bear's aggression began to subside. The mother grizzly dropped her head slightly, her growls fading into a low rumble. Amelia continued to back away, her notepad still held high until she was a considerable distance from the bears. Only then did the grizzly turn her attention back to her cubs, guiding them away from the area, deeper into the forest. Amelia stood frozen for a moment, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. She had done it. She had managed to defuse the situation without injury to herself or the bears. Relief washed over her, followed by a profound sense of respect for the creature she had just encountered. As she made her way back to camp, Amelia replayed the encounter in her mind. The fear, the tension, the delicate balance between life and death. All of it was a stark reminder of the reality of working in the wild. She had been fortunate today. Her training and quick thinking allowed her to escape unharmed, but she knew that the outcome could have easily been different. Tanner, renowned for his mastery in the wilderness and his impressive collection of exotic animal trophies, had always been admired for his hunting prowess. Based in Montana, his home, nestled against the Bitterroot Mountains, was adorned with the heads of lions, leopards, and rhinos. Yet one trophy eluded him: the mighty grizzly bear of Alaska, a symbol of ultimate challenge and raw power. For years, Roy dreamt of adding a grizzly to his collection. Stories of these massive bears, towering over 10 feet tall with claws as sharp as knives, fueled his ambition. He envisioned himself returning with a grizzly hide draped over his shoulders, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest hunters. Roy meticulously planned the expedition, studying maps, consulting Alaskan guides, and investing in high-end hunting gear. He chose the timing carefully, waiting for the snow to melt enough for tracking, while avoiding the summer scarcity of bears. The anticipation was intense, reigniting a thrill he hadn't felt in years. The journey to Alaska was long and solitary. Roy traveled by plane, boat, and finally, on foot into the heart of the wilderness. The vast, untamed landscape stretched endlessly, with towering pines and snow-capped mountains casting a serene yet daunting backdrop. The crisp air, filled with the scent of pine and earth, was a stark contrast to Montana's dusty plains. Roy set up camp near a river, his small, sturdy tent designed for Alaskan weather. He kept his rifle close and ventured out daily, tracking deer and elk while searching for signs of the elusive grizzly. Despite his efforts, the bear remained hidden. Roy's frustration grew, but he refused to give up, driven by the thought of returning empty-handed. This hunt was not just a pursuit, but a test of his skill, patience, and resolve. After nearly a month, Roy's persistence paid off. On a crisp early morning, with dawn's first light painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, he set out with renewed hope. As he moved through the forest, the usual wilderness sounds were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. His senses heightened. He noticed massive paw prints pressed into the soft earth, leading away from the river and into the dense underbrush. His heart raced. These tracks were fresh, perhaps made only hours before. Roy followed the tracks, his pulse pounding in his ears. The trail was long and winding, taking him deeper into the wilderness than he had ever been before. The terrain grew more treacherous, with steep inclines and thick undergrowth making progress slow and difficult. But Roy was relentless. He pushed forward, driven by a single-minded determination. The tracks led him to a clearing, a wide open space surrounded by towering pine trees. In the center of the clearing, standing tall and majestic, was the grizzly. The bear was massive, far larger than Roy had imagined. Its fur was a deep, rich brown, with streaks of silver running through it, giving it an almost ethereal appearance in the early morning light. The bear's muscles rippled beneath its thick coat as it moved, its powerful legs carrying it with a surprising grace for an animal of its size. Roy felt a surge of adrenaline as he raised his rifle, his hands steady, his mind focused. This was the moment he had been waiting for. But as he aimed, something unexpected happened. The bear, sensing his presence, turned to face him. Their eyes locked, and for a brief moment Roy felt a strange connection. The bear's eyes were not the cold, lifeless orbs he had seen in other animals he had hunted. They were intelligent, almost human, filled with an emotion Roy couldn't quite place. It was as if the bear understood him, understood why he was there. The realization hit Roy like a punch to the gut. This was not just a hunt. This was a confrontation, a test of wills between two apex predators. Before Roy could react, the bear charged. It was a blur of motion, moving faster than Roy could have ever anticipated. The ground shook beneath its massive weight as it barreled towards him, its jaws open in a ferocious roar. Roy's heart leaped into his throat as he scrambled to fire. But in his haste, he miscalculated. His foot caught on a root hidden beneath the undergrowth, sending him sprawling to the ground. The rifle slipped from his grasp, skidding out of reach. Panic surged through Roy as the bear closed in, towering over him, blocking out the sun. Its hot breath and growls vibrated through his chest, filling the air with the wild, musky scent of the beast. For the first time in his life, Roy felt truly vulnerable, exposed to the raw, unyielding power of nature. Time seemed to slow as Roy looked up, the bear so close he could see every strand of its fur, the sunlight glinting off its sharp yellowed teeth. The bear's eyes, once intelligent and assessing, now held anger, fear, and perhaps a touch of sadness. Roy sensed its hesitation, as if the bear, too, questioned the deadly encounter they found themselves in. Lying helpless beneath the beast that could end his life in a heartbeat, Roy felt a wave of emotion wash over him. It wasn't fear. He had known fear before. It was regretful, deep, and consuming. His life had been spent taking from nature, claiming trophies as symbols of his dominance. But now, face to face with this magnificent creature, he saw the futility of it all. The bear seemed to sense the shift in Roy. Its growls softened and the tension in its muscles eased. Roy's breath came in ragged gasps as he stared into the bear's eyes, silently pleading for mercy. His rifle, the instrument of his past life, lay useless several feet away. At that moment, Roy made a silent vow. He would give up hunting. No longer would he take from nature. He would protect it. The lives he had taken would weigh on him no longer. As if understanding his resolve, the bear stepped back, its eyes never leaving Roy's. With a final growl, it turned and disappeared into the forest shadows. Roy lay there for several moments, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just transpired. Finally, with great effort, he pushed himself to his feet and began the long, deliberate journey back to camp. The hunt was over, not as he had imagined, but in a way that felt right. In August 2023, the Thomas family embarked on a much-anticipated hiking adventure in Montana's picturesque Bear Creek Den Park. Jack, a 12-year-old boy with an adventurous spirit, led the way with his family's golden retriever Max, bounding happily alongside him. His parents, Lisa and Robert, followed closely, basking in the joy of the family's time together in nature. The trail, though popular, was tranquil at this time of day. The rustling leaves and occasional chirp of birds were the only sounds that accompanied their hike. The family paused at a clearing, admiring the view of a distant mountain range, their hearts light and minds at ease. Max, excited by the sights and smells of the wilderness, darted into the brush, his barking echoing through the trees. Unbeknownst to the Thomas family, their joyous hike had unknowingly led them toward a potentially dangerous situation. Hidden in the dense undergrowth was a mother grizzly bear and her 2 cubs. The vigilant and protective bear had chosen this secluded area to nurture her young away from the prying eyes of humans. The cubs, playful and curious, were nestled in the thick brush, their safety depending on their mother's constant vigilance. As Max's enthusiastic barks pierced the quiet, the cubs, startled by the unexpected noise, scurried and whined in alarm. The sound of the dog's barking reached the ears of the mother bear, who instantly went on high alert. Her instincts, honed by years of survival, detected a potential threat. With a low growl, she rose from her resting spot, her massive frame tense and ready. The mother grizzly's heart raced as she prepared to defend her offspring. Jack, oblivious to the danger, continued to explore the trail, his enthusiasm undiminished by the peaceful surroundings. The vibrant colors of the wildflowers and the cool shade of the trees made the hike seem like a page from a storybook. He wandered farther from the trail, drawn by a cluster of particularly striking blooms. Suddenly, the situation escalated. The mother grizzly, feeling the urgency of the threat to her cubs, emerged from the brush with startling speed. Her powerful legs propelled her forward, her eyes locked onto the source of disturbance. The sudden appearance of the massive bear sent shockwaves through the family. Max, still barking, had run back towards Jack, his fur bristling with alarm. In a moment of sheer terror, the bear charged. Jack, frozen in shock, turned to see the terrifying figure barreling toward him. The grizzly's roar was deafening, a primal sound that cut through the serene afternoon like a knife. The sheer force of the bear's charge knocked Jack off his feet, sending him sprawling onto the forest floor. Lisa and Robert, their hearts racing and adrenaline surging, sprang into action. They grabbed their bear spray, an essential item they had packed just in case, and rushed toward their son. The bear, focused on the perceived threat to her cubs, was relentless. Her massive paws swatted and clawed at Jack, who lay helpless, his body racked with pain. Lisa, her hands trembling, aimed the bear spray with all the strength she could muster. The toxic spray erupted in a fine mist, enveloping the bear in a cloud of deterrent. The bear recoiled, her powerful frame momentarily stunned by the intense spray. Her eyes, filled with a glare, darted between the now wounded Jack and the desperate parents. Robert, not missing a beat, continued to spray the bear while Lisa crawled toward Jack, her hands shaking as she assessed his injuries. The boy's face was pale, and blood seeped from multiple gashes and wounds. The bear, disoriented and agitated by the spray, hesitated for a split second before retreating into the brush with a final menacing growl. Her cubs, sensing the danger had passed, emerged cautiously and followed their mother, disappearing into the depths of the forest. The Thomas family, now faced with a heart-wrenching reality, scrambled to provide aid to Jack. Lisa applied first aid as best as she could, her mind racing with fear and urgency. Robert called for emergency assistance, his voice strained with panic. The forest, once a place of beauty, now seemed like a hostile environment, with every rustle of the leaves and snap of a twig amplifying their distress. The minutes dragged on as they awaited help. The air was thick with tension and dread. When the sound of distant helicopters finally reached them, it felt like a lifeline. Rescuers arrived swiftly, their expertise and calm demeanor providing a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. They carefully lifted Jack onto a stretcher, the boy's unconscious form a stark reminder of the brutality of nature. The helicopter's blades whirred as it ascended, carrying Jack to a nearby hospital. Lisa and Robert, their hearts heavy with anguish, followed in the ambulance, their minds replaying every moment of the horrifying encounter. Jack's injuries were severe, and while he would survive, The road to recovery was uncertain and fraught with challenges. In the weeks and months that followed, the Thomas family grappled with the psychological and emotional aftermath of their harrowing experience. The trail they once loved now symbolized a near-tragic encounter, a reminder of nature's unpredictable and sometimes brutal realities. They had ventured into the wilderness, seeking adventure and beauty, but were met with the stark, terrifying force of a mother grizzly defending her young. Dr. Lucas O'Brien had always been drawn to the wild, untamed corners of the world. As a young child from Idaho, he spent countless hours observing the animals that roamed the forests near his home, developing a deep respect for the natural world. This passion eventually led him to become a veterinarian, specializing in the care of exotic and wild animals. Lucas's expertise in treating large predators, especially bears, quickly earned him a stellar reputation across the region. His approach to animal care was unique, blending medical treatment with a deep understanding of the animal's need for trust and psychological comfort, particularly when they were injured or in distress. This holistic method made him the go-to expert for difficult cases. One day, Lucas received an urgent call from a wildlife sanctuary deep in the northern Idaho wilderness. The sanctuary had recently taken in a massive injured grizzly bear named Brutus. The bear had been caught in a snare trap, likely set by a poacher, leaving him with a severe infected wound around his front leg. Despite the sanctuary staff's best efforts, Brutus's condition had worsened, and his aggressive behavior made it impossible for them to administer proper care. When Lucas arrived, Brutus's sheer size and the intensity in his eyes struck him immediately. The bear, even weakened by pain, was a formidable presence. The staff briefed Lucas on their struggles to treat the injury, noting how Brutus lashed out at anyone who came near, his snarls echoing through the infirmary. Lucas knew that to help Brutus, he first needed to gain the bear's trust. He began spending time near the enclosure, not attempting to enter but instead quietly observing the bear's movements and demeanor. Lucas spoke softly to Brutus, his voice steady and calm, while leaving food as a gesture of goodwill. This process was slow and required immense patience, but Lucas understood that trust couldn't be rushed. For weeks, Brutus ignored Lucas, refusing to eat the food offered. However, Lucas persisted, returning daily at the same time, repeating the routine. Gradually, Brutus began to accept the food, though he remained wary, his sharp eyes never leaving Lucas. As time passed, Lucas noticed subtle changes in Brutus's behavior. The bear seemed less hostile, and his movements were less defensive when Lucas was near. Finally, after weeks of patient interaction, Lucas felt ready to enter the enclosure. When he did, Brutus, though still cautious, did not react aggressively. Lucas approached slowly, speaking in soothing tones, and began treating the bear's wound. He cleaned the deep gash gently, aware of every flinch from the bear. Lucas knew that Brutus was closely watching him, and he made sure his movements were deliberate and unthreatening. As Lucas worked, the tension in Brutus's body slowly eased. The treatment took time, and the road to recovery would be long, but the bond of trust Lucas had forged with the bear made it possible. Brutus's gradual acceptance of Lucas's care marked the beginning of his healing, not just of the physical wound, but of the trust he had lost due to human cruelty. The treatment sessions became routine, with Lucas visiting Brutus every day. The bear's condition slowly improved. The infection began to recede, and the wound started to close. Lucas could see the physical changes, but more importantly, he could feel the shift in Brutus's demeanor. The bear had begun to trust him, allowing Lucas closer each day, even tolerating his presence when he was not administering treatment. It was during one of these sessions that the bond between Lucas and Brutus would be put to the ultimate test. The day began like any other, with Lucas arriving at the sanctuary early in the morning. The weather had turned colder, with a biting wind sweeping through the sanctuary. Lucas prepared the medications and antiseptics, ready to clean Brutus's wound once more. He entered the enclosure with the same calm, measured steps he had taken countless times before. Brutus was lying on his side, his massive body relaxed as Lucas approached. The bear lifted his head briefly, then settled back down, seemingly unconcerned by Lucas's presence. Lucas kneeled beside him, beginning the process of cleaning the wound. He worked carefully, his hands steady as he applied the antiseptic, wiping away the dirt and debris that had accumulated. As Lucas reached for the syringe to administer the antibiotics, he noticed a change in Brutus's breathing. The bear's breath had become shallower, and there was a tension in his body that hadn't been there before. Lucas paused, his instincts on high alert. He glanced at Brutus's face, seeing the way the bear's eyes had narrowed, his ears twitching slightly. Before Lucas could react, Bruno suddenly shifted. The bear's body tensed, and he pushed himself up onto all fours. The movement was so sudden that Lucas barely had time to pull back. Brutus's growl rumbled through the enclosure, low and menacing, a sound that sent a jolt of adrenaline through Lucas. Lucas knew he was in a dangerous situation. Despite Brutus's weakened state, the bear's sudden aggression was a stark reminder of his wild nature. Any sudden movement could trigger an attack, so Lucas remained still, his mind racing while his body projected calmness. Brutus stepped closer, growling louder, his massive paws leaving deep impressions in the dirt. Lucas could feel the bear's power and the weight of the moment. Fear would only escalate the situation, so Lucas had to trust in the fragile bond they had formed. Keeping his movement slow, Lucas lowered his hands, showing Brutus he meant no threat. The bear watched him intently, his growl tapering off into a low rumble. Lucas began speaking softly, more to calm himself than the bear, his voice a steady, soothing presence. Time seemed to stretch as Brutus continued to watch, the tension between them thick. But gradually the bear's body began to relax. Brutus let out a huff and stepped back, his posture less aggressive, though his eyes never left Lucas. The bear's breathing slowed, and the danger of the moment passed as Brutus settled back down, his growls fading into silence. Relief washed over Lucas as he allowed himself to breathe again. The close encounter had reinforced how tenuous their bond was, but it also showed that Brutus had tested him, and Lucas had responded with patience and calm. This incident, rather than undoing their progress, strengthened their relationship, and had lived a life of routine and sedentary habits. At 42 and weighing 500 pounds, he realized that his existence was on the brink of serious decline. The burden of his weight had become overwhelming, but within him, a strong resolve emerged to reclaim a lost vitality. His decision to go on a camping trip was both unexpected and bold. Although Kurt was no seasoned outdoorsman, having only experienced nature through family picnics and childhood fishing trips, he felt drawn to the wilds of Montana. It was time to challenge both his physical limitations and the predictability of his life. Kurt's plan was straightforward yet formidable. Drive from Cheyenne, Wyoming to a remote Montana campsite, set up camp, and spend a week immersed in nature. He packed his truck with essentials: an oversized tent, a sturdy camp chair, a large sleeping bag, cooking gear, and a week's worth of simple food: canned beans, instant oatmeal, dried fruits, and nuts. As he drove through Wyoming's flat plains into Montana's rugged terrain, he marveled at the changing landscape. Towering pines, dense forests, and clear rivers filled him with both awe and apprehension. By the time he reached the trailhead leading to his campsite, the sun was low, casting long shadows over the forest floor. Kurt felt the strain of his heavy pack on his back and knees as he unloaded his gear. Each step along the trail was a stark reminder of his physical decline. His breathing was labored, his thighs rubbed painfully, and he sweat-drenched his shirt. Despite the discomfort, a dormant spark of life began to flicker within him. After what felt like an eternity, Kurt arrived at a small clearing by a river marked on his map. Exhausted, he dropped his pack and sat on a log to rest. Setting up camp proved difficult. His hands trembled with fatigue, and he struggled with the tent poles and stakes. Nevertheless, he managed to erect his tent and prepare a fire, recognizing its importance for warmth, cooking, and safety. As the fire crackled, Kurt felt a surge of pride. He cooked his first meal of canned beans over the flames and ate with an unexpected appetite. The simple meal tasted better than anything he could remember, and for the first time in years, Kurt experienced a profound sense of satisfaction. The next few days passed in a similar rhythm. Kurt spent his mornings exploring the area around his campsite, carefully venturing along the riverbank and into the forest. Each step was a challenge, but with each passing day, his body began to adapt. His legs grew stronger, his breath more even. He was still slow, still heavy, but the wilderness was teaching him patience and resilience. The afternoons were spent resting, fishing, and preparing simple meals. Evenings were reserved for the fire, where he would sit for hours, lost in thought as he watched the flames dance. But as much as Kurt was growing accustomed to his new routine, he was also aware of the ever-present dangers of the wilderness. He had seen signs of wildlife, deer tracks by the river, the distant silhouette of an elk on a ridge, and once the unmistakable paw prints of a bear in the mud near his campsite. These signs were a reminder that he was not alone, that this was a place where the rules of nature prevailed and where his human presence was insignificant. On the third evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Kurt prepared his dinner as usual. The fire crackled, sending up sparks that danced in the twilight. He opened a can of beans, poured them into his pot, and set them on the fire. The routine had become comforting, a series of small victories that marked his progress. As he waited for his meal to heat, he gazed out at the river, lost in the serene beauty of the moment. But the tranquility was shattered by a sound that sent a chill down his spine, a rustling in the underbrush, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. Kurt's heart pounded in his chest as he turned toward the noise, his eyes scanning the darkening woods. At first he saw nothing, but then, emerging from the shadows, a massive grizzly bear stepped into the clearing. The bear was enormous, easily 800 pounds, with a thick coat of fur that glistened in the fading light. Its eyes locked onto Kurt, and in that moment the man felt an overwhelming wave of fear. He was no match for this creature. His size, once a source of insecurity, now felt like a death sentence. The bear sniffed the air, its powerful nose picking up the scent of the beans cooking over the fire. It took a step closer, and then another, its movements slow and deliberate. Kurt's mind raced, his thoughts a blur of panic and disbelief. He had read about bear encounters and knew the basic rules. Don't run, make yourself look big, and stand your ground. But all of that knowledge seemed useless in the face of this massive beast. His body tensed, every instinct screaming at him to flee. But he knew that running would only trigger the bear's predatory instincts. He had no weapons, no means of defending himself, and the fire, which had seemed so comforting moments ago, now felt pitifully inadequate. Deep within him, a memory surfaced. Bears might be intimidated by size. Desperate, Kurt forced himself up, his legs trembling, and raised his arms high, shouting. His guttural roar echoed through the forest, startling him with its intensity. To his astonishment, the bear stopped, its massive frame outlined against the darkening sky. They faced each other in a tense standoff, the fire crackling between them and casting eerie shadows. Slowly, the bear began to retreat, taking cautious steps back into the forest until its footsteps faded into the night. Exhausted, Kurt sank to the ground, his legs unable to support him. As the fire crackled softly and the pot of beans went forgotten, the gravity of the encounter settled in. Kurt had faced a grizzly bear and survived. The fear that had consumed him moments ago gave way to a profound relief and an unexpected surge of confidence. At that moment, Kurt realized he was stronger than he had ever believed. His size, once a source of shame, had become a tool for survival. September 17, 2024, Sergei Volkov, a veteran hunter, ventured deep into the vast Siberian wilderness near the Yenisei River. The 58-year-old had been hunting in these remote forests for over 3 decades, and this annual trip was a tradition for him. Born and raised in a small village in northern Siberia, Sergei learned hunting skills from his father and grandfather. He was known for his expertise in tracking wildlife, especially deer, and had always navigated the wild with confidence and ease. His trips were a chance for him to escape the noise of modern life and reconnect with nature, something he cherished deeply. Siberia was Sergei's second home, with its endless stretches of dense forest, harsh winters, and untamed beauty. This year, however, the wilderness had changed. Recent wildfires had swept through parts of the forest, displacing many animals, including predators like grizzly bears. Sergei knew the risks of encountering wildlife in such conditions, but he was prepared. He had his trusted rifle, a hunting knife, and a satellite phone, which he always carried in case of emergencies. Yet on this particular day, fate had other plans. Sergei spent the morning tracking a deer, moving silently through the forest. The air was crisp, and the ground beneath him was soft with fallen leaves. His keen eyes followed the subtle signs of movement, his years of experience guiding him. He was focused, his attention fully on the hunt, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Unbeknownst to Sergei, a massive grizzly bear had wandered into the area, displaced by the wildfires. The bear, starving and aggressive, had been searching for food, driven into unfamiliar territory by the fires. It was a huge, powerful animal, capable of moving silently despite its size. The bear, now only yards away from Sergei, had been watching him for some time, its instincts triggered by hunger and the scent of the hunter's presence. Suddenly, the bear charged. With barely a sound, it closed the distance between them in seconds. Sergei didn't hear it coming until it was too late. He felt the force of the animal slams into him from behind, knocking him off his feet. The impact was overwhelming, and before Sergei could react, his rifle was thrown from his hands, landing several feet away. The weight of the grizzly bear pressed down on him, pinning him to the ground. Sergei struggled to breathe as the massive animal growled, its claws tearing into his back. Pain shot through his body as he desperately tried to reach for his knife, the only weapon left to defend himself. The bear's powerful jaws snapped near his head, and Sergei knew he had only seconds to act. Summoning all his strength, he managed to pull the knife from his belt and swung it toward the bear. The blade struck the bear's side, but the animal was undeterred. Its sheer size and power made Sergei's efforts seem almost futile. Pinned beneath the bear's crushing weight, Sergei fought with everything he had, his mind racing for a way to escape. The forest around them was silent except for the sound of the struggle, as the hunter fought for his life in the remote Siberian wilderness. Sergei's body was being crushed under the immense weight of the grizzly bear, its powerful claws ripping at his back. Every breath felt like a struggle, and the pain coursing through him was almost unbearable. He gripped his hunting knife tightly, knowing that it was the only thing standing between him and certain death. With every ounce of strength he had left, Sergei drove the knife into the bear's side again, aiming for a spot between its thick fur and muscle. The bear roared in pain, rearing back for a moment, but it wasn't enough to stop the attack. The bear, driven by hunger and instinct, pressed forward again. Sergei could feel his strength fading, his body weakening under the relentless weight. His mind raced as he tried to find a way out, but the bear's sheer size and power left him with few options. His satellite phone, which could have been his lifeline, had been knocked out of his jacket pocket during the struggle and was now lying useless in the dirt, its screen cracked and dark. The bear lunged once more, but Sergei managed to roll to the side, just out of reach of its massive claws. His back was bleeding and his muscles screamed in pain, but his instincts for survival pushed him onward. With the knife still in his hand, he struck the bear again, this time aiming for its neck. The bear recoiled, shaking its head in anger and pain. Sergei knew this might be his only chance to escape. Summoning what little energy he had left, Sergei scrambled to his feet, his legs weak and trembling beneath him. He was barely able to stand, but he forced himself to run, his vision blurring from exhaustion and pain. Behind him, the bear staggered for a moment, confused by the injuries Sergei had inflicted. Then, with one last growl, it turned and retreated into the trees, disappearing into the dense forest. Sergei collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. His body was covered in deep wounds, his clothing torn and soaked with blood. The wilderness around him was eerily quiet once more, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath during the attack. Sergei lay there for several minutes, too weak to move, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had survived the bear's attack, but he was critically injured and miles from the nearest village. With no working phone and no way to call for help, Sergei knew his only chance was to crawl to safety. He dragged himself slowly through the forest, his body protesting with every movement. The sun was beginning to set, and the cold Siberian night would soon descend upon him. He could feel his strength slipping away, but he kept moving, driven by a will to survive. In the days that followed, Sergei's disappearance led to a search by local villagers. They found him weak and barely alive, deep in the forest. He was rushed to the nearest hospital, where he received treatment for his severe injuries. Though he survived, the attack left him with lasting scars, both physical and emotional. The Siberian wilderness had always been his second home, but now he understood its dangers more deeply than ever before. The bear had been a reminder of nature's unpredictable power, and Sergei, though a seasoned hunter, knew that he would never venture into the wilderness again without a new respect for the creatures that called it home. October 2024, Dave Harris, a seasoned hunter, ventured deep into Wyoming's remote wilderness. The crisp air was eerily still, setting his instincts on edge. As Dave navigated through the dense forest, he stumbled upon the carcass of a massive grizzly bear. The sight was shocking. This bear had been a formidable creature, but now its body was marred with deep, vicious wounds. It looked as if it had been killed in a violent struggle. Dave's initial thought was that another hunter might have taken down the bear, but as he approached, the gravity of the scene became clear. Blood matted its fur, and its lifeless eyes seemed to tell of a brutal fight. A sudden, guttural growl shattered the silence, sending a chill through Dave. Emerging from nearby bushes was a larger male grizzly bear, its eyes blazing with fury. This was no mere territorial growl. It was the victor of the fight, now defending its claim. Realizing the threat, Dave's heart raced. The massive bear, even larger than the dead one, moved with purposeful intent. This wasn't a chance encounter. Dave had intruded on the grizzly's territory, and now he was its target. Instinct kicked in and he fled into the forest, dodging rocks and roots as he sprinted through the rugged terrain. Behind him, the bear's growls grew louder, its powerful strides pounding the earth in relentless pursuit. Every breath Dave took was sharp and ragged, the danger ever present as the enraged grizzly closed in. At that moment, survival was all that mattered. One wrong step, and the wilderness would claim him too. Dave's mind raced, calculating his best chance for survival. He knew he needed to put as much distance between himself and the bear as possible, but the dense forest and the bear's speed made it a relentless pursuit. Each burst of speed was met with a staggering reminder of the bear's persistence. The forest was alive with the sounds of the chase. Branches snaped and leaves rustled as Dave navigated through the labyrinth of trees. At one point, Dave attempted to gain some advantage by climbing a steep incline. He hoped the higher ground would give him a better view of his surroundings and provide a chance to evade the bear. He scrambled up the slope, his muscles straining with effort. The incline was treacherous, but Dave's experience allowed him to scale it quickly. As he reached the top, he glanced back, his eyes scanning the forest below for any sign of the bear. However, the grizzly's presence was unmistakable. It had slowed momentarily, its massive form visible through the gaps in the trees. Its breathing was heavy, each exhale a cloud of mist in the chilly air. The bear's gaze was fixed on Dave, its eyes filled with unyielding resolve. It was clear that the grizzly was not deterred. It would continue its pursuit with relentless determination. Dave knew he couldn't afford to rest. He descended the slope with the same urgency, trying to stay ahead of the bear. His mind was a whirl of strategies, each one a fleeting hope for escape. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees and underbrush forming a tangled barrier that threatened to trap him. Despite his efforts, the bear's growls and the thudding of its footsteps were a constant reminder of the danger just behind him. With every ounce of strength and skill he possessed, Dave continued to push forward. His legs ached and his breath was ragged, but he couldn't afford to stop. The forest, once a place of quiet beauty, had become a battleground. Every shadow, every sound was a potential threat, and the grizzly's presence was a stark reminder of nature's raw power. In the midst of his flight, Dave spotted a narrow, rocky crevice, a potential hiding spot. Without hesitation, he dove into the space, hoping that the bear's size and the narrowness of the gap would allow him to be spared. He pressed himself into the crevice, barely managing to stay out of sight. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of how close he had come to being overtaken. From his hiding spot, Dave could hear the bear's frustration. The grizzly circled the area, its growls filled with a mixture of anger and confusion. It clawed at the ground, a sign of its agitation. Dave held his breath, praying that the bear's temper would drive it away, at least long enough for him to find another means of escape. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, as Dave remained hidden, his senses alert to every sound. Finally, the bear's growls grew fainter, and the heavy thudding of its steps receded into the distance. Dave waited for a while longer, ensuring that the danger had passed before he carefully emerged from his hiding spot. Exhausted but alive, Dave surveyed the area, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from his system. The encounter had been a stark reminder of the unpredictability of nature and the raw power that even a single creature could wield. As he made his way back to safer ground, Dave's thoughts were consumed by the intensity of his near-death experience. The wilderness had once again proven to be a place of both beauty and danger, and he had been forced to confront its darker side. The encounter with the grizzly had left an indelible mark on him, a reminder of the fine line between predator and prey in the untamed wilderness. For Dave Harris, it was a harrowing lesson in the realities of nature. The storm hit with an unforgiving ferocity, catching the group of tourists entirely off guard. They had been staying in a small, remote cabin nestled deep within the Alaskan wilderness, a place meant to offer peace and isolation, far from the trappings of everyday life. In early September 2024, the air was crisp, and the landscape stretched in every direction, offering breathtaking views of jagged mountain peaks and thick forests. But the beauty was deceptive. That evening, the tranquil atmosphere turned violent as dark clouds rolled in with startling speed, unleashing torrents of rain and howling winds that battered the fragile structure they were sheltering in. The cabin, old and weathered, groaned under the strain of the storm. Windows rattled in their frames, and the roof shingles peeled away, disappearing into the chaos. Inside, the group of 5 huddled together, watching as the storm tested the limits of their fragile sanctuary. Water leaked through cracks in the ceiling, and the wind found every possible gap, sending cold gusts swirling around the room. At its peak, the storm became too much for the cabin to endure. A loud crack split the air as a section of the roof collapsed inward, bringing with it a deluge of rain and debris. Frantic, they scrambled to repair the damage, but it was clear that the cabin had been severely compromised. The wooden walls, already old, had been further weakened by the battering winds and water. The storm raged on into the night, but as morning broke, the winds finally began to die down, leaving the group to survey the damage. The roof was partially destroyed, and the walls had buckled, sagging inward as if ready to give way at any moment. Despite the isolation and lack of communication, they still believed they could fix the cabin enough to stay safe until help arrived, but the reality was far more dire. As they worked to patch up the holes and shore up the walls, something far more ominous began to unfold in the wilderness around them. Unbeknownst to them, the scent of food stored inside the cabin had carried far on the storm's winds, attracting the attention of a nearby grizzly bear. This wasn't just any bear. It was a large, hungry male, driven by a primal instinct as it sniffed the air and followed the tantalizing scent through the dense forest. With the summer drawing to a close, the bear's need to fatten up for the coming winter grew ever more urgent. The scent of food was irresistible. As the group worked outside trying to reinforce the structure, they heard rustling in the underbrush surrounding the cabin. At first, they thought it might be the wind, but the rustling grew louder, more deliberate. Then they saw it, an enormous grizzly bear emerging from the trees. The bear was massive, its dark fur matted with rain, its eyes locked onto the cabin. It sniffed the air again, detecting the scent of the food they had inside. The storm had not only weakened their cabin, but it also made the bear's approach inevitable. Panic set in as the group scrambled to get back inside. The bear advanced slowly at first, curious but cautious. The tourists hurried into the cabin, slamming the damaged door shut behind them and barricading it with whatever they could find. They hoped the bear would lose interest, but the scent of food was too powerful, too enticing for the grizzly to ignore. The bear circled the cabin, its massive paws crunching through the wet debris scattered across the ground. With a sudden burst of force, it lunged at the door, slamming its body against the weakened wood. The walls shuddered, and the group could feel the sheer power of the animal on the other side. Again and again the bear struck, and the door began to splinter. They realized they couldn't hold the cabin against the bear's relentless assault. With no other option, the group fled to the basement, a small, cramped space beneath the cabin, accessible by a trapdoor in the floor. They had initially planned to use it for storage, but now it would serve as their last line of defense. They piled into the narrow basement, sealing the trapdoor behind them. Above, they could hear the bear tearing into the cabin with ease. The walls, already weakened by the storm, were no match for the animal's strength. Wood cracked and splintered as the bear ripped through the structure, determined to get to the food it could smell inside. Trapped below, the tourists could hear everything: the crashing of wood, the heavy breathing of the bear as it ransacked the cabin, and the occasional deep growl that sent shivers down their spines. They were helpless, sealed off in the dark, damp basement with no way to communicate with the outside world. The storm had knocked out any chance of cell service, and even if they had managed to call for help, it would take days for anyone to reach them in such a remote area. The grizzly, having torn through much of the cabin, found the stash of food and began to devour it with brutal efficiency. For hours, the bear lingered, feasting and exploring the remains of the cabin. Every sound it made sent fresh waves of fear through the group below. They knew that if the bear discovered the trapdoor, it would easily tear it apart just as it had the rest of the cabin. Time passed slowly, every minute stretching into eternity. The tourists could do nothing but wait, trapped in a constant state of fear. They had no idea how long the bear would stay, or if it would eventually find them. Sleep was impossible, and the tension in the basement was palpable. Above them, the bear continued to roam, occasionally brushing against the trap door or scratching at the remaining walls. By the time the bear finally left, the cabin was in ruins. The roof was half gone, the walls splintered, and the interior had been completely ransacked. But the tourists trapped in the basement had survived. They emerged cautiously, unsure if the bear was truly gone. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and the musty smell of fear that had permeated the confined space below. The group, though physically unharmed, was shaken to its core. A day later, when rescuers finally arrived, they found the group huddled in the cabin's wreckage, exhausted and terrified but alive. The bear had long since vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind only destruction in its wake. The tourists were surrounded by the remnants of the violent encounter, broken walls, scattered debris, and the gnawing realization of how close they had come to disaster.